He resigned from cabinet on a point of principle, only to be tossed out by the UCP. Now Peter Guthrie has emerged as a real thorn in the side for the government and potentially a serious political threat too. A conversation with Peter Guthrie up next on the Line Alberta podcast. All right, well, welcome to the Line Alberta podcast. My name is Rob Breakenridge. Great to have you with us this week. It has certainly been an eventful and tumultuous year in Alberta politics, and our guest this week has been at the center of much of it. Peter Guthrie is the MLA for Airdrie-Cochrane, and I guess now, as of just recently, is now leader of the Alberta Party. So joining us to talk about his journey and everything going on in Alberta politics is the aforementioned Peter Guthrie. Peter, great to have you with us here.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Happy to be here.
As I say, it's been an interesting year. You started 2025 as Alberta's infrastructure minister. You end 2025 as the leader of the Alberta Party. So, I mean, that kind of speaks to your journey this year. But let's just talk about the news, first of all, just recently here, and walk us through the process now that has brought you into the Alberta Party and now as its leader.
Yeah, and it's been quite a process back in... I'll say July 2nd, actually. Scott Sinclair and I had, started out to revive the Progressive Conservative Party.
Right.
And in doing so, we were going to do it by a signature process with Elections Alberta. So we would go out, get 10,000 signatures, submit those, and then obtain the name. The process was going to be a little bit arduous and maybe a little bit longer, but we felt it was worthwhile and something that Albertans were looking for. So fast forward, not even 2 weeks, we had a threat of a lawsuit. But simultaneously, along with that, the Alberta Party had approached us. They were saying that, look, we feel a lot like you do, and that revitalizing that progressive conservative movement will be something that they supported. And so we started working together. And by the end of August, we had submitted to Elections Alberta for the name, the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party. And not too long later, probably actually by September 9th, we had the UCP interfering in that electoral process and our application. Thereafter, we had a lawsuit. We saw an injunction go against Elections Alberta to stop them from issuing the name. Right. And we saw why we had all of these delays. The delays were to implement legislation to limit political parties coming forth and banning the word conservative from the use by any other party besides the UCP. So they did a really good job over the last 6 months of slowing us down and making us now ultimately shift gears.
Yeah, it's interesting. The legal arguments, I think in that case might have been fascinating because, as you talked about previously, there's a dropping of the ball, I guess, when it comes to the UCP and the availability of the Alberta PC name and brand. And Elections Alberta was just kind of following its own protocols in allowing this to move forward. Once they come back with legislation, I mean, it just shows maybe the extent to which this worried them, or they saw this as a threat to basically legislate the PC party out of existence. That was one of the aspects of Bill 14. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I think they've been seeing the same thing that we are. As far as the party is concerned, there has been a shift year over year over year in policies, and those PCers, so to speak, have left that United Conservative Party. So it's no longer united. Now, from a polling perspective, we've seen some internal polls that haven't been released to the public. There's been one publicly released poll, and the UCP, I know, have been doing their own. Those results have not been released to their entire caucus, but what they show is that with a strong progressive conservative party option out there, the UCP fall to third place. And it makes the PCs and the NDs the two dominant parties. So it basically relegates the UCP back to the old Wild Rose as a potential rural option.
So now then, I guess the plan is to move forward with the Alberta Party as an existing entity, and now to build this up as sort of that centrist conservative alternative to the UCP. Where do things go from here for you on that front?
Yeah, we will still be changing the name. It's back in, I think it was August 27th, we had a vote of members. The members voted 94% in support of changing that name to Progressive Conservative.
Right.
Of some note anyway. So what we're trying to do is we're trying now to engage with those members, with constituents, but also with a professional firm in order to help us to find something that's going to honor the spirit of that Progressive Conservative name.
Yeah, because not only have they in legislation prevented any party from using the word conservative, it sounds like some abbreviation combinations are part of this. So how far are they going to try to block this? And what options do you still have, do you think?
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. You're right. Abbreviations. There's also legacy parties that are in there. And there's also combinations of words. As an example, Progressive Conservative. So PC. Anything that is PC is not allowed. So that eliminates all C words from the use with Progressive. But you have to think about all the other parties that are out there. I mean, there's a lot of different party names. There's Advantage, there's Democratic, Green, Independence, Liberal, Pro-Life, Reform, Communist. I mean, all of those are off limits, as well as any acronyms that they may use. And so it is very limiting where we can go. And so you can see why we need to kind of take our time here and see what combinations might work. We're hoping to have this kind of figured out by the beginning of the new year, and then, start to explore with Elections Alberta thereafter.
I mean, it's interesting on the topic of Bill 14 and how self-serving some of the various aspects of this bill turned out to be, not just the party names, but again, the constant maneuvering and changing the rules midstream to keep the separatists in the UCP base happy. And I think this is one of the areas you focused on where maybe we need that proud Canadian. I don't know if that's PC, but a proud Canadian federalist kind of conservative alternative. When you look at everything that's been happening on the referendum side and what we saw recently at the UCP AGM, what does that all say to you?
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned earlier about this kind of shift year over year, I think back to the first AGM, the UCP AGM that I went to, and there was very fulsome debate that went on over various policies, and some of them made it through and some of them didn't, but there was some really good interactions from a very diverse group of individuals. Over the years, that has changed. And one, the nature of the policies coming forth to be voted on at those AGMs, and also the amount of support that each of those are getting. And so as that base, the PC base left the party, and those with a more independence mindset started to kind of take over. We saw what we did happen at the last AGM, where now we have approximately 3/4 of the UCP's board being a separatist in nature. In fact, the APP have stated, Jeffrey Rath had stated that there's going to be no nominees getting elected unless they are approved by them. So they need to be independence based. So the influence from that separatist group is significantly increased. They're in fact even now calling for a review of the premier. So not only does the premier have issues now with the general public and, with a progressive conservative movement on its way up, she now has these internal struggles that she's going to have to deal with.
Well, and I mean, it feels like now, unless we see an election, I know you've kind of challenged the premier to let's go to the polls, but otherwise, I mean, it almost feels now at this point that she's bending over backward to make sure the separatists get their referendum. Do you feel that that's where things are headed in the new year?
I think where we're heading is to an election, a general election. I really do. the Premier's office, they've been talking about it since last summer. And I think with what we've seen recently, the Premier's going to be left with ultimately no choice. From what I've heard and what I know of the Premier, she would not want to go early. But I think when she weighs all the options, she may not be left with any. And that being, one, you have those internal struggles. Now, let's say a review is successful, and they want to have that review before the summer. Well, the Premier's probably better off going to the general public than she is facing another review internally. Furthermore, getting ahead of us and trying to not allow us to organize, getting ahead of the budget. The budget's going to be brutal, probably looking at $8.5 billion, I would guess, with probably double digits forecasted for the following year and no path to balance. And then a real big one, the Auditor General's report is going to come out at the end of March. And that could be very damning for this UCP government. And it could take them months, if at all, that they can recover from it, depending upon what's going to be released. And, I have some knowledge as to what's going to be in there, but I think it's going to be widespread, and it's not going to just be related to health. But there's a series of different things. And with time, think about that memorandum of understanding that they just came out on the pipeline.
Yeah.
In a year and 10 months from now, when the election is set for, there's not going to be shovels in the ground. Right. And so if she wants to campaign, she can campaign on the fact that, hey, look, we're the only ones that can build a pipeline. The NDP, they're not going to do it. You need to vote for the UCP, and we'll get you that pipeline. So there's a lot of different factors, and there's even much more than that. Actually, one I will bring up is recall.
Yeah.
Bill 14 was rumored to have had recall in it. And either that's an outright repeal or some amendments to it. And they ended up pulling that. And I think one of the reasons they did that is that they could use that as an excuse to go to the polls. More and more recall petitions surface, and they say, okay, look, the public wants to have a general election, and we're going to do it. And it's very, very risky for them.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to ask you about recall and just how rattled maybe they are by all of this. I don't know how likely some of these campaigns are to succeed, but just so many of them, I don't know if it's awkward or embarrassing at some level for the government, or as you say, maybe it does give them a bit of an excuse. But do they seem worried about it, or what's your read on it?
Really the bar is pretty high, to organize that in 90 days. And to do it in the middle of the winter, and you have Christmas in there, it's going to be a very difficult feat. It's certainly not impossible if people are motivated. So, the 21 that are out there, I'm highly doubtful that they could be successful. But if 2 or 3 were to get through, is that a risk that they want to take? I'm not sure. And so what ends up happening is those 2 or 3 that are likely ministers of the Crown, they start getting nervous, and they start applying pressure to get help and get assistance from the administration. And as you can see, there's letters that are being put out by various members who have a recall petition underneath them. And I see a little bit of panic in some of them.
You also mentioned the healthcare issue, and of course, there was, one of the triggers for you resigning from cabinet and ultimately leaving the UCP. Your call for a public inquiry into AHS procurement and other contracts. We've had this year some interesting revelations. Of course, the report from Judge Wyant helped shed some light on all of this, but a lot of questions still as the year draws to a close. The AG, I think, can hopefully shed some light on all of this, but I don't know, what's your feeling right now? Do we know more about this scandal, or is there still a lot more to come here?
I think there's a lot more to come. Judge Wyant's report was intended to clear the UCP, and they've tried to use it as that, but it absolutely did not. I am disappointed in some of my former cabinet mates in not stepping up and saying anything, because when I back in February approached cabinet, and I did so on 2 occasions, I brought some forth some of the very information that is in that Wyant report. Some of it even word for word. And so it's shocking and surprising to me that we never saw any outward commentary about that report, because at the time they're saying that I'm a conspiracy theorist and that I'm fabricating this thing, and then ultimately they ended up removing me from caucus over this very scandal, and yet it comes forth even through their own report showing that yes, indeed, this did happen. So I would say that there's some disappointment there from members of the UCP and my former colleagues in not making a stand and doing the right thing.
Well, I mean, just recently we saw the government back away from some of these surgical contracts. I don't know if they're trying to get ahead of any of this, or they see that some of these issues are coming to light. What did that signal to you?
There's a few things here that happened during that week that I found fascinating. One, they removed themselves from those 2 surgical contracts. And I'll talk about that a bit later. But there's the removal of the 2 surgical contracts. You had Minister Adriana LaGrange start changing her story in her involvement in the surgical contracts,
right,
and the Tylenol deal. She started to waver on that. We also saw the Premier come out and say that they're going to go in a new direction in procurement within not only within health, but throughout government. That all happened in 1 week. And to me, that too is also speaking to perhaps a new path that they're trying to create, and a new narrative that they want to create if there is indeed going to be an election. Now, I can tell you, the fourth thing that happened in that week is that they had suspended the CEO that they had appointed to AHS,
right,
Andre Tremblay. So there was those 4 things that occurred in 1 week. Now, Minister Matt Jones, as far as those 2 surgical contracts are concerned, that was Lethbridge and Red Deer. I know him well. He's a finance guy. He's a numbers guy. If he looked at those contracts, and I think they were in the order of about $400 million, that deal, if it was a bad deal for Albertans, I feel confident that Matt would do the right thing. And it looks like he has. He's going to go back out to the public and procure that in an open and honest fashion. And that's just the kind of guy he is.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this came just in the last few weeks, and it just sort of speaks to how chaotic the last few weeks have been as they've ended this session of the legislature, sort of pushed through these bills, including Bill 14. There was a weird spectacle last week, and it's not something I remember seeing recently, where basically the government shut down the opposition and independent MLAs from being able to present their business or private members' bills. To talk a bit about what we saw, I guess it was, I think, Monday of last week. Walk us through that.
That was a very, very odd thing. In my 6.5 years, I've never seen it, and I've been told that if something like that has happened, it certainly hasn't happened in the last 20 years. So I'll explain what this is. So, as a private member, I'm allowed to bring forth questions. It's kind of like a FOIP for the public, but it's for an MLA. I'm allowed to bring forward formal questions. I put them forward. They go on the order paper, and the government has 20 days to respond. So when they respond, they're going to say, we either accept these, so they're going to provide a written answer. If they do that, I'm not allowed to speak to those questions. They will, because they're going to formalize it in a letter. Or they will amend it or reject it. If they do that, then I am allowed to speak in the House to introduce the motion and speak for 10 minutes. The government would then respond, and then it would go to the floor. And the NDP, any member could speak, and then I would get 5 minutes closing for each and every question. Now, the government accepted, it was either 9 or 10 questions, and then there was another 9 that they did not. And so those were supposed to be addressed in the House during private member time, which only happens on Monday afternoons. So my personal submissions were supposed to be debated in the House from 3 p.m. till 5 p.m. that day. And instead of allowing that to be heard, the UCP shut down the legislature for the entire afternoon, sitting right after question period for 3 straight hours. It was unheard of. I came in partway through QP, and I had my arm full of speeches ready to go, and sat down and was kind of excited to be able to talk about these questions. And I got to frankly say I was a little bit surprised that the UCP was going to allow this to happen. But I certainly did not expect that they would shut down the legislature. I just thought that they would interfere with me along the way and call points of order and use procedural methodology to stop me. But ultimately, they took a course that completely took me by surprise. But that seems to be happening a lot, though, Rob.
Well, yeah, I mean, just even on other bills, like I think to me, the teachers strike bill 2 and invoking the notwithstanding clause, right? The argument from the government that, legislatures, should be in charge of this sort of thing. Politicians should be in charge of this. It should be democratic. And then to turn around and shut down debate over something so important. And we saw a lot of that this session, it seems.
Yeah, notwithstanding clause used on 4 separate bills. Bill 14 provided the Minister of Justice with immunity over the Law Society being able to prosecute him for anything that he might do while he's in office, which I found quite fascinating. But they really, that element of control is really surfaced. It has been there all along, but this session was really something extraordinary. And I think that speaks to fear. Ultimately, the UCP are worried. They see that Albertans they're losing support of Albertans, and they're losing grasp of government. They're probably having internal struggles. I would imagine that there's rumors behind the scenes that are going around with the current MLAs, and then now, as we know, with the provincial board. So there's a lot of turmoil there, and I got to think that that's invoking a lot of fear.
Well, it is, and it's back to what you said earlier about where things go in the new year and the possibility of an early election. I mean, are we expecting there to be a spring session of the legislature?
I don't think so. I really don't. All the signs seem to be indicating that they're ready and they're prepared. And I think that they're just ultimately deciding that they don't have much choice. Now, from a polling perspective, they're probably thinking that they've slowed us down enough that we're not going to be able to organize. But I do feel that we're going to be able to put up a really strong front here. But if you just look heads up right now with the NDP, I've seen 2 polls. One had the NDP ahead by 5 points, and the other had the NDP ahead by 7. So heads up right now, that's problematic for the UCP. But I think that their feeling will be that 5 points or 7 points is not something that's insurmountable. But if they allow us to organize and they give us till a year and 10 months, they may be 10 to 15 points down, and that is not going to be a hill that they're going to be able to climb.
Well, do you worry about a 2015 sort of scenario with vote splitting and that benefiting the NDP?
The last 2 elections, 2019, 2023, it's the only time in Alberta's history that we really only had 2 dominant parties. There always has been competition. In the last 50 years, it's been Conservatives that have been elected. 2015 is the only time that we didn't have that. And that was not really a testament to the NDP. It was a protest vote. It was people saying that they've had enough of cronyism and corruption. And so those are the elements that we have that have developed right now today. So if we do not have another Conservative option on that ballot, what's going to happen is the NDP will absolutely get in. So I think it's an absolute necessity that we have somebody that's speaking to that moderate voice, that reasoned voice, one that believes that decisions need to be made on logic, reason, data, analysis, expert advice. I'm an engineer in my former life.
Yeah.
Went to the University of Alberta, and that's how we make decisions. We, they call it, think slow, act fast. So that means you plan, you go through feasibility, you make sure that you're prepared, you make sure that your team is on side, then you make sure the public is on side, and then when you go to act, you act quickly with the support of those around you, and you have a high chance of success under those conditions. Right now, that's not what occurs. And what occurs is, how do we get to our end? We have this ideological end that we want to get to. So how do we get there? And, you look at the Alberta Next panel. That's a prime example of how do they get to a separatist agenda. That we have the UCP claiming that they're not separatists, but they say that in one room, but in other rooms they don't. But then you look at their actions, and they put together this Alberta Next panel. They jam it full of supporters that support independence, and then figure out, okay, well, we want to get to an independence referendum. Well, let's create this little package. Let's tour around Alberta. Let's make sure that the result that we get is the one that we want. That is not the way that we should be making decisions. We should make decisions with a hypothesis, but you have to be ready to change depending upon the evidence that presents itself. And it should be honest and clear.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the arguments you made too is the need for a party that's also actually fiscally conservative. And I think this is one of the areas where you criticize the government. They still portray themselves as fiscally conservative. You mentioned how ugly the next budget might look, but despite some of the the massive hauls of energy revenues we've seen in recent years, we've actually seen some really large deficits because spending has increased tremendously, actually, under this government, under this premier. So, the idea that they would portray themselves, run as fiscal conservatives, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's absurd. This UCP government requires $75 oil to balance. Yeah. And in fact, it might even be slightly higher than that. Since Danielle Smith has taken over, the UCP has increased their budget by 23%. They have increased the size of the GOA by 14%. One of the things that still is out there is that talk of red tape reduction, but that's gone out the window. Like, there's been at least 8 new Crown corporations that have been formed. There are 3 more that I know of that are coming. Each one of these comes with physical infrastructure, comes with administration costs, bureaucratic costs, executives, and a budget in order to execute on their programs and services. So there is a tremendous amount of internal growth going inside of government, and it's not looking like it's going to stop. So I'm not sure where they come up with this notion that they are conservative by nature, because they absolutely are not, nor are they fiscally conservative.
Well, it's certainly shaping up to be an interesting and eventful 2026. Either way, Peter Guthrie, hope you get some downtime over the holidays here. It's been an interesting year, and really appreciate you making some time for us here.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I appreciate talking to you.
Our thanks once again to Peter Guthrie, the MLA for Airdrie-Cochrane and the new leader of the Alberta Party, which may evolve into something else in the new year. That's going to be one political storyline to keep an eye on. The idea originally, as Peter discussed, was to try to revive the PC Party, to try to create a more sort of centrist, federalist, conservative alternative. And the UCP has really gone out of their way, first with the threat of a lawsuit, then by using the power of legislation to try to make that threat go away. So I think, as Peter alluded to, they're exploring their options, and we'll see what the Alberta Party morphs into 2026, and if indeed we do see an election. It is interesting, though, the extent to which Peter Guthrie has become kind of a central player in Alberta politics here, and his path to getting there. In a lot of ways, I mean, the UCP created this problem for themselves. Peter Guthrie resigned from cabinet because he believed that there was a need to get to the bottom of this healthcare scandal, the AHS contracts and procurement, and simply wanted some answers, transparency from his own government. So you don't often see that in politics, that kind of resignation on principle. And then even as a backbencher in the UCP calling for a public inquiry. That was a bridge too far for the government. So to get turfed over that, I think says more about the UCP than anything else. And so, yeah, I mean, it's not surprising then that Peter Guthrie has become a problem for the UCP and the extent to which they've really tried to neutralize that political threat. Certainly it is, I think, a dynamic in Alberta politics that we've moved away from. Having multiple conservative parties. And we did see in 2015, as we discussed, the NDP benefit from that vote splitting. But was that a rare exception? I think that's one of the reasons why the UCP is so worried about this, why the UCP came to be in the first place, to try to prevent that sort of vote splitting from ever happening again. But to try to keep this coalition together is becoming a real challenge, I think, for the UCP, and where we've seen those disruptions in the past, a lot of these pressures right now, especially what you're seeing on the separatist side, is it too much to try to keep that big tent together? And will that inevitably splinter? I think that's going to be one of the storylines to watch in 2026. Look, Albertans are going to be casting ballots one way or another in 2026, whether it be in a general election that comes a year or more early, whether it's in a referendum on independence, or for that matter, potential referendums on a whole bunch of other issues, not to mention the voter recall campaigns and whether that's going to lead to recall votes and by-elections in various ridings. So one way or another, it is going to be a busy year for Alberta voters, it appears, in 2026. Peter Guthrie seems convinced that for a variety of reasons, the Alberta government, the UCP, the Premier, are going to gamble on an early election. And I think he makes some valid points. We'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out. But of course, we'll be all over it on the Line Alberta and, of course, the Line Alberta podcast. Don't forget, you can find us, follow us, subscribe, alberta.readtheline.ca, and we'll be gearing up, I think, for a very interesting and eventful 2026. Thanks for being with us here in 2025 as we've kicked off this new venture, spending some time with us, listening to the podcast, reading our articles and commentaries as well. Hope you have a really safe and enjoyable holidays, and we're looking forward to speaking more with you in 2026. My name is Rob Breakenridge. This is the Line Alberta podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.